Hey, everybody. I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. John Wooden said, "Discipline yourself, and others won't need to." On today's episode, we talk about the power of discipline, how to improve results, creating a culture of excellence, how your response to life's events is affecting your outcomes, and more. My guest is a husband and father, an entrepreneur, author, global keynote speaker, and an advisor to high growth businesses, pro and college sports teams, and schools. He helps his clients raise the standards of leadership, create a disciplined culture, and align behavior to produce results. His daily email newsletter on personal discipline, aptly titled Daily Discipline, is read by over 35,000 people each day. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Inc., Forbes, Sports Illustrated, and other notable media outlets. Please welcome the man who's on a mission to help others earn what they want, accelerate results, and create better competitors, Brian Kight. Brian, thank you for being here. It is so great to see you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jay. Glad to have a conversation with you, and hope we can bring some value to your listeners.
Absolutely. I know we will. Well, I'm very excited about today's conversation. The topics that I know we're going to touch on today are right. They hit me square in the heart. These are things that I think about, that I work on myself every single day. So I'm excited to have this conversation. So let's dive right in. I thought a good starting point for us would be for you to share with our audience what your favorite personality trait is about yourself.
My favorite personality trait about myself, inherent or chosen?
Let's go with both.
My favorite inherent trait, natural trait that I haven't had to cultivate is my energy. My energy has served me. It's certainly tripped me up, but it's served me far more than it's tripped me up, and it's an incredible asset of mine. And my favorite chosen one is my adherence to my principles, is my willingness to go through pain to hold my principles.
Excellent. So let's talk about the chosen trait for a moment or two. So your ability to adhere to your principles. So talk about what some of those principles are and give us an example or two, recent examples of how you adhere to those principles.
Yeah. So, I'll give a kind of a practical one that ties to my professional world that also will give everybody who's listening a heads up on what's about to come for the next hour or so. We'll try to make this have some relevance and self-interest for the listeners. So, a big portion of my professional career is spent on stage or on a platform or on podcasts like this or mine. And with that comes exposure. And with exposure comes a ton of opinions. And I will couch this in, I share this not strictly so people can understand something about me, but I share this because this is something that is increasingly something everybody has to deal with. And it also addresses the number one fear, the number one phobia in the world. You know what the number one phobia in the world is, Jay?
Well, I have heard many a time that it's public speaking. Is that not the number one?
Yeah, it is. No, it's public speaking. Yeah. People have a bigger phobia of public speaking than they have of like heights or death. Think about that for a second. People are more afraid of public speaking than they are of dying. And I said that to somebody one time and they said, yeah, because at least if I was dead, I wouldn't have to be on stage talking to all of you people, which I laughed, but I'll give you an adherence to this is the context of an element of how I adhere to my principles. So I believe in a principle of truth with love, right? And telling the truth to people is hard work. It's really hard work. And when you tell the truth to people, or when I tell the truth to people, there are certain truths that are very uncomfortable to hear, that can and do create friction, or will get you judged or criticized, or cause people to misinterpret you or interpret you accurately, but then they won't like you. And we live in a world now where we are dealing with what we currently call cancel culture. And so here's how I adhere to my principles. I adhere to my principles in that I'm going to speak the truth with love because I don't need your approval. And when I get on a stage and speak, or I'm speaking right now, I am not concerned with the approval of an audience, because I didn't ask for your approval when I woke up this morning for whether I could feel good about myself, whether I could be okay, or whether I will be okay tomorrow. And so I'm not going to ask for or seek approval while I am sharing messages about things I believe about the world, about what's going on, or trying to add value. I'm going to speak the truth with love because I need to speak what I actually feel is true without being concerned with what somebody else will think of it and therefore think of me. Now, that doesn't mean I speak things that are trying to create those problems, right? Because that's now I'm trying to hurt feelings or whatever, and it's probably the big problem I have with like the political arena right now, where you know, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, left or right, going both directions, of they're not even attempting to speak truth with love. They're attempting to undermine some other person, which is part politics, but then it comes into some other environments. I get on the stage and like people and listen, it costs me sometimes. It costs me where like I turn some people off because they're like, well, I don't like this, or that was kind of evocative, or whatever it is, or I step on toes. But I would rather pay a price to speak truth I believe in and have it come at the cost of some people not liking me than I would to have a lot of people like me for not saying things that I truly fully believe or hiding those things. And so I'll pay that price gladly. And that's a great example of, you know, I get on stage and if I'm like, oh, if I say this, it might turn off a couple hundred people in this audience of 3,000. Cool. Great. Because to me, a principle isn't worth anything unless you're willing to go through some pain for it. Ooh. If you're not willing to feel pain for your principles, then you don't actually believe in those principles. If when you feel pain, you back away from it and you sacrifice the principle to preserve your comfort, you didn't really believe it. So that moment of pain for me is my testing point for, do I really believe this? Or do I just like the sound of this principle, the idea of this principle? And that's just one practical way that I bring that to the table in my life.
I love that. That's very powerful. Thank you for sharing the principle and also how you adhere to it. So that as you were sharing that with me, it made me think about providing feedback, whether it's feedback in the workplace, feedback from a family perspective, personal area. Give us some examples, if you will, of how we can most effectively give feedback following the principle that you just outlined for us, where, sure, you know, truth with love. So if we're being asked to provide feedback, how should we provide that feedback, and how raw should that feedback be?
Well, you couched it with, if we're being asked to provide feedback, which is a very heavy assumption. And I would go so far as to say a rare occurrence. We are not asked to provide feedback, at least not in the truth with love sort of avenue. We might get asked for feedback in an email or whatever, but, you know, let me put it this way. You know, my wife, we've been married for 8 years, coming up here in a week. We've got 2 kids, 6 and 3. At no point has my wife ever sat down over, you know, a glass of wine or a cocktail or dinner or whatever and said, BK, I love you, please tell me feedback on what kind of parent you think I am and how good of a job I'm doing. She has never asked for that. Okay. Nor have I sat down and said, Britt, tell me exactly what you think of me as a father. I've never asked for that feedback, not in that manner. And yet we've exchanged feedback. The tension is giving feedback when we don't know whether the other person is interested, ready, or willing to receive it. But you picked a topic that I could easily consume the next hour in. So I'm gonna try not to consume an entire hour on this. So let me just hit a handful of pieces, because one of the things I get great joy out of, and I think people need, is they need to see the simplicity within the setting and not the complexity. And this is a topic that you can easily go to all the complex stuff, and it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters in feedback is the simple. That's all that matters. And the complexity is distracting, and it's noise, and it screws you up when you get caught in the complexity. So here's the first thing. The first thing is this. Why do we, let me go back. You said truth with love. So I need to make sure I get this premise, because I didn't put this out. Truth with love. The reason that works is this. Why do some people who love somebody not tell them the truth? If you love somebody, they don't want to hurt them. There you go. So we use love as a reason and justification for hiding the truth from people we love. Does that sound like love to you?
No.
Okay. What do we do when we want to tell that, use the word that you used, raw truth, or another term that would be similar to that, brutal honesty? What do we sometimes turn off or remove from the communication to get raw truth or brutal honesty across? We give the truth, but we do it without love. Right? So here's the point. Can you be 100% honest and 100% loving? Of course. Don't sacrifice one to do the other. So when I say truth with love, what I watch in the world is I watch people, in the name of love, sacrifice truth. I also watch them say, in the name of truth, sacrifice that expression and empathetic version of love. Not the huggy, touchy-feely, that kind of sign, but like the I genuinely care, I'm giving you my heart kind of love, right? Like the kind of love I can give to you, or you can give to me, or we can give to the audience. Care, concern, compassion, right? The real kind, the worldly kind. So that's number one. So I don't lose as 50-50. It's 100-100. It's 100% truth, 100% love if we're going to do it. Now, 100% truth can be debated. Let's just put it like we typically don't do 100% truth. We do, I'm not going to tell you every opinion, and neither are you, but that's a whole separate topic. So that's number one. Number two, on the topic of feedback, is this. Where do we put in more effort and energy in the business space? Training. Why do we have to train so hard on giving good feedback? Like, why is everything like, here's how to give that? Great. We're not. No, I would go so far as to say, I actually don't think that's the reason. I actually don't think I don't think the reason why we train it so much is because people are so bad at giving feedback. Now, I do think that we struggle giving feedback in some contexts, but why is giving feedback hard, Jay? Like, why is it difficult to do? Is the act of you telling me something that you think about me or something you saw me do, is it difficult for you to speak those words out loud?
So I would just answer the question this way, based on my own personal experience, based on where I am today. Yeah. Today, I have no issue giving feedback. Years ago, when I was in my corporate life, toward the beginning, I had a very difficult time giving feedback because, well, for two reasons. Number one, I quite honestly didn't know how to give proper feedback. But number two, I wanted to be the good guy, the nice guy, the person who was respected. And I was fearful that if I shared something that may have come across as negative about someone else, that would paint me in a bad light, and it would be a very difficult conversation, one in which I wasn't prepared to have.
There you go. And this is true of anybody who feels this with feedback, which is just about everybody, but for a small section of behavior styles who are naturally wired for this stuff, is when we give feedback, the biggest tension in giving feedback is not the act of giving. It is the concern for what will the other person do with what I say to them. That's the concern. So the reason we have to train so hard at giving feedback is because people are so bad at receiving feedback. Think about it, Jay. If you know that I am not going to judge you or get mad at you or yell at you or get defensive or hold it over your head or fight you about it, if you know I'm just going to listen, take it in, consider, ask some questions, and we can continue on our way, even if I disagree with the feedback that you give me, if you know that I am a really good receiver of feedback, you're wonderful at giving feedback. Everyone is. You can just say the truth without worrying about it. What makes feedback hard is that we train giving feedback. We don't train receiving feedback. People are sensitive. They are personal. They make assumptions. They make interpretations. They run their own emotional story. They project their own insecurities onto other people. They say things like, I'm not saying I'm perfect. You point out where they're not perfect, and they get mad at you for it. It's other people's mismanaged emotions that makes giving feedback hard. And we know this is true. Are you married, or have you ever been married?
I am married, yes.
Okay. Sometimes, and it not I only ask that just for context, right? In married couples, right? Married partnerships. Do they take feedback from each other and criticism from each other well? Generally speaking, do married couples exchange feedback and criticism well, generally speaking?
Generally speaking, no. There's plenty of books written on that, by the way.
That's right. You got it, right? Generally speaking, no. But in a rational sense, and frankly, even in a loving sense, who is the one person in this world who knows us well enough, cares about us deeply enough that, again, when we're out of that kind of cloud, that we would agree to say the person that we trust, who care about, and is our partner, that we could take that kind of feedback or criticism from without having to worry about long-term consequences, would be our spouse. And yet, here's how we know that we're bad at receiving feedback. Our spouses, people's spouses, will tell them something they know damn well is true about them, and they will still get defensive about it. We'll hear something that we know is true, or we'll tell our spouse something that we both know is real, and the person will still get mad and angry and resentful and emotional, and then change the dynamic in the room, even when we know it's true. And then we feel like we're taking crazy pills, right? So when it comes to feedback, this is something I'm very, as you can tell, I have a lot of energy around, because if we just change our lens and say this, think about a business. If everyone in the business were to work for 12 months on becoming far better feedback receivers, then universally, everyone in the business becomes better feedback givers just because we're better receivers. I think we are wasting our time and effort and energy and money on giving feedback, because, Jay, if you become a world-class feedback giver, it actually doesn't change the needle very much if people are terrible feedback receivers. You've only changed one end of the communication, and you're hitting a brick wall, and you're getting frustrated because you're like, wait a minute, I've been training my face off for this. I'm doing a great job. I'm doing the sandwich technique. I'm caring. I'm doing this. And I'm still bumping up against this wall because I can't control how that person perceives, processes, and manages their emotions with what I'm saying.
That's
We're
such
limited.
a great point. And for all of you that are watching and listening right now, I hope you're taking notes. I certainly am, right? I learn from every one of these experiences. And what a great way of looking at this and explaining why feedback doesn't always work or isn't as effective as it could be in the area that we should be focusing on training how to receive feedback, training on managing our emotions. I'll share with you, Brian, that this is an area that I'm a constant work in progress. And you mentioned about your wife, and that she's not, the two of you aren't asking each other for feedback in your marriage. How am I doing as a parent? How did I do at this event with my two
At least on that
kids?
topic.
Those, right,
Yeah.
on that topic, right? So I where I am today, I am asking for more of that feedback. My wife and I share more of that because I'm more open to it. I want to learn because I fully realize that even after 30 some odd years of marriage, that I am just, I have so far to go in terms of relational understanding and emotional intelligence and all these other incredible areas that make up successful human relations. And I have blind spots. You do too. So does everyone that's watching and listening right now. And if I'm not aware of those, and I create the same patterns of behavior over and over again, and I'm not aware of the impact that it's having. And this obviously can be applied in the workplace as well. If we don't have that sense of awareness, then we don't have the tools to change the behavior because we don't have the information that's telling us that this is landing wrong. So I am asking for feedback. I am asking to find out, how did I do with that? How did I show up today? How did I affect you this morning in our conversation? Share with me what your thoughts were on that. Is there an area that I can improve upon?
Yeah, I love that. And what you're highlighting is, really a teaching point that, give this to listeners is think about for a second the difference between how hard you are working to give feedback to somebody and, pay attention to their emotions and make sure that you're interpreted right. And think about, like, look at how hard you work to give feedback the right way. And if you've ever had the experience where you show up and you're kind of fretting over giving the feedback and you're concerned and you've prepped for it and you're like putting in all this effort to give feedback, and then you give the feedback and you push through and you fight and you're working really hard, and then the other person puts no effort into receiving it, misinterprets you immediately, reacts emotionally, gets defensive. And my whole observation of this scenario, back to what I'm talking about with simplicity, is just keep it very simple. If you put in 100% of effort and exhaust yourself to be great at giving feedback, but the other person just doesn't work hard on receiving it well, that is not an equitable communication. And it's not on us to be perfect feedback needle threaders because the other person is emotionally immature. I'm not going to judge them, and they're really good people. But if you are a difficult person to talk to, it's not on the feedback giver. It's not on them. And so if you're working at 100% to receive feedback, I'll work with you at 100% to give it well. But if you're not going to work hard on receiving it well, do not ask me to shoulder and carry that load on your behalf, because you just don't want to do that emotional, personal work because you're afraid of hearing something about yourself that doesn't match how you want to see yourself. That's an absence of integrity.
Ah, that is so good. That is so good. So remember, everybody, truth with love. Work on the receiving side. Work on both sides, but it has to be 100% on both sides in order to have an effective level of communication. I love that. So I want to dig into the world of discipline and talk about the power of discipline. So, as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, you have a daily discipline email newsletter that you send out, and that readership has just continued to grow, which clearly means that you're delivering incredible content that is making an impact, that's changing behaviors, that's changing lives. I'm curious, let's wind the clock back a bit and talk about when you first recognized the need for discipline and how this became so impactful in your life. And you've clearly you've built an entire business around this and speak to this on a regular basis. So where did this begin for you? What was the catalyst or the event that really crystallized this in your mind?
Have you ever taken Strengths Finders?
I have.
The looking at, yeah. So I took Strengths Finders, and I actually just did it recently here within the last 12 months, and it was mostly unchanged. A little bit of adjustment at the top, but there's 35 or 36 strengths. Discipline was number 34 out of 35 in strengths of mine. So discipline is entirely unnatural for me. And it's a chosen and built skill set, developed skill set, not an inherent one. And that matters because the word discipline, I played sports growing up, played college football. And I'm turned 41 here in a couple weeks. There was really only a very limited way in which I was exposed to the word discipline and what discipline was growing up through school, parenting, and sports. And discipline was either compliance with a rule, obedience to an authority, or punishment. That was it. Stay within the rules, do what the authority says and be obedient, or get punished. I don't know if you can pick this up about me. Those things rub me the wrong way. I'm not a compliant individual. I am not an obedient person. I don't enjoy punishment. I don't know who does. Gluttons, maybe, right?
That's a different conversation.
Yeah, that's right. So this notion of be disciplined, it was never attractive. In fact, it was the opposite. It was unattractive. And then I heard the definitions of discipline. Discipline is doing what you don't want to do when you're supposed to do it. Well, who wants to live that way? Right? I hear coaches define it, and I love how they define this. That's sarcasm. I can't stand how they define this because it only works for young people who are powerless that coaches get to control, sports coaches. Because here's how they define discipline. Discipline is doing what you were supposed to do, the way you were told to do it, when you were told to do it, at the standard you were told to do it, whether you feel like it or not. Just try holding that standard to a 45-year-old working in your company. Just try passing that definition along to somebody with a few kids, a mortgage, and a spouse. That definition only works for a 15-year-old who has no option or recourse or power to push back against you. So it's just a shitty definition of discipline, and it's false. So I looked at that and I was like, okay. So then I got really excited. I was like, well, should I reject discipline? But then I'm like, well, hold on a second, because I believe in timeless truths, and I love studying historical context, because the only thing I'm interested in is what's worked forever. I don't care about what people think is new. I only care about what has worked forever, because what feels like it's new, we don't actually know if it works. Phones are a new technology, but we do all the same things that we've done for all of human history through phones. When people are like, all you want to do is be liked, you just want to share your information and get likes on your tweets. Well, like, why do you think people did things 3,000 years ago? They did things that got them social approval. We just do social approval through phones instead of through, direct communities or whatever it is now. So as I read through history, here's what I recognized. The defining trait of essentially all successful people and all downfalls was a lack of discipline or a presence of discipline. But I started studying the root of what discipline means, and I discovered that discipline does not mean punishment or obedience or compliance. Discipline comes from a Latin word, discipuli, which is a student, and a discipline is a study. And it unlocked discipline for me. Discipline was not following somebody else's rules. It was choosing my standards for myself and practicing them in my life. That's what discipline is. And it changed. Here is the notion that changed it for me, Jay. Discipline comes from within. It is not something that is imposed on me from the outside. And the only way I had experienced or been taught discipline was the kind that was imposed upon me from the outside. And once I realized and discovered that discipline was what I chose from the inside, I was like, that's what I'm building my entire life on. And that was late 20s for me. And I was, I'd already like a lot of different stuff and E plus R equals O and all these different things that I did, but I didn't use the word discipline in that section, in that era of my life, in that era of my career. I didn't use the word discipline in college. I didn't even use the word discipline probably until, I don't know, 27, 28. Like I had like a 5-year, 6-year sort of window where that just word wasn't in my vocabulary. It wasn't part of what I did or what I talked about. I would use responsibility. I would use emotional management. I would use intentionality, purpose, right? These kinds of things. And then I had this epiphany, this discovery, this sharpening of what the word discipline actually was. And then I kind of did my own deep dive in my own life around this. And I kind of looked like, well, if I was building my own discipline, if this is all true, like what would I do? I started structuring it that way. And then I realized, oh, I'm not disciplined according to how other people define discipline. But how other people define discipline is the secular or pop culture way. And that's false. It's not accurate. The true definition of discipline, that's me. That's my life. I define it. I define my standards. I define my purpose. I define the skill set that I want to go. I define the objectives that I put all of those things in place for. And now all of a sudden I realized, and this was kind of the freedom portion of this and the flexibility aspect of it, is that your discipline does not have to look at all like my discipline. And if we're doing it well, it won't. We'll have crossover, but Jay Scherr's discipline needs to work for who?
Me.
Yeah. And Brian Kite's discipline needs to work for him.
You and only you.
Right. And then here's what I think is amazing about this. I have 2 young kids. They're 6 and they're 3. And I talk to audiences about this all of the time. Does there come a time, Jay, where kids no longer live out of obedience to their parents? Do they reach a portion? Do they reach a stage in life where they no longer live out of obedience to their parents?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I'll speak from personal
and it's a little
experience.
Bit right. Like I'm sure in your own life, I'm guessing you're not just living day to day being like, well, what's obedience look like for me? Of course not. You crossed that threshold, as did I. So with my own kids, there is an aspect of obedience right now because they're 6 and they're 3, and there will continue to be for some time period. However, as a dad, when my kids cross the threshold where they are no longer making choices out of obedience to myself and my wife, I want them to be equipped with the discipline to make choices for the life they want to build, the person they want to become, the direction they want to go. And I don't want them worried about obedience to me. I want them thinking about discipline to who they want to become, and that they work their face off to build themselves into who they want to be. Because I won't be there to answer the question, give the rule, show the thing, and they're not going to check in with me. They're going to have to be them on their own. That's why I want them to have the discipline to know what they want to do and how to do it, and to have the courage to stay true to that discipline when it works and adjust their discipline when it's not working for them.
Beautiful. So let's stay on a point here. So this really started to connect with you in your late 20s. What was the first steps that you took, if you can think back, knowing that this comes from within, knowing that we define discipline for ourselves, and Who did you want to become at that point? So what were the first steps that you were taking to build that discipline that comes from within?
The first step for me was deciding whether or not I was going to be selective in my application of discipline across my life, or whether or not I was going to be universal. Was I going to be somebody who decided to set standards in some places and then just ignore it in other places? Or was I going to, or was I going to, was I going to, was it going to be a foundational aspect of how I lived everything? That was my first decision. And that one didn't take very long for me to decide it was going to be universal. It was going to be foundational. I wasn't going to be selective or situational. It was going to be universal. So I was going to set standards and purpose and intention behind the food I eat and what I drink and how often I drink and when I drink and how I study and what I read and how I talk to people and how I treat people. And I don't want to suggest that I was a wholly undisciplined person in my mid to late 20s. I just didn't use the word. So I will say, in the spirit of like disclosure and honesty of like, I did this work. I just didn't use the word discipline. And so while I was very much on the track of discipline at the time, I didn't use the word. So part of this was like a discovery that what I was doing was in fact a discipline. What I'd been doing was discipline, and I was already on that track. And I think there's a lot of people who will discover this, who have, frankly, and this is part of my mission, they resist discipline because they have an old mindset towards it. They have that embedded code that was put into their minds earlier. And so they're resisting discipline. And then when they hear me talk about discipline, they kind of have to get over, well, I didn't think that was discipline. And I'm like, no, it is. But you hear people talk about discipline, and by the way, what people group, what group of professionals uses the word discipline most often, especially that's advising others? They're on the media everywhere and they're writing books all over the place. Like, who's the discipline group?
Yeah, Navy SEALs, military
right?
leaders, etc.
Yeah. And what percentage of people are interested in a military-like life? Not a lot. We like the Navy SEALs because they got good stories, and we go America, and I'm big American, and my kids have to stand up and put their hand in their heart when we national anthem, no matter what's going on, all this different stuff. But I can also tell you, I'm not interested in living like David Goggins. I don't want to do that. I'm not interested. Wake up at 4:30 in the morning every day in the Jocko. Like, no, thank you. Maybe sometimes, great, but discipline is not doing 4:30 a.m. workouts. Some of the most disciplined people in the world woke up at 10 and went to bed at 2. They woke up at 10 a.m. and they worked till 2 a.m. It doesn't matter what time of day you wake up. What matters is that you pick your standard and you go. So there's a lot of people who right now think that to be disciplined, they have to wake up at 5 a.m. No, you don't. You got to choose a standard and then like of your own and adhere to it. That's what you have to do. It's also integrity. It's also character, and discipline is the key that unlocks all of those things. So I had that cool epiphany of, a lot of what I'm doing is disciplined, but then I doubled down on it. Jay, is what I did. I was like, oh, great. This is going to become the central figure. And what I discovered was everything got pushed through the lens of discipline. Everything got pushed through the lens of, and when I think of discipline, like if I was defining it and I was giving it fabric, right? The 5 elements of discipline that I look at are choice, objectives, choice, objectives, standards, effort, and skill. I'm in control of the choice. I have to make the choice. It won't be a habit. It won't be autopilot. It's not going to happen unthinking. I make every decision. Purpose or objectives. Every choice that I make, I must be clear about what is the reason behind why I am doing this. If you're going to tell me something about me, back to feedback. If I'm going to get defensive and resist and reject what you're trying to tell me, I damn well better have a purpose and a reason that is articulate for doing so. Otherwise, I am being driven by something that is not my decision, then it lacks purpose. Don't want to be in that spot. Standards. I need to establish a standard for everything that exists in my life. If it's in my life, I have a standard for it. The food I eat, standard. How I treat people, standard. How I speak, standard. What time I wake up, what time I go to sleep, how I interact with my wife, how I interact with you, right? Standard, 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 right? How much money I spend on clothes, standard. The cool part is, and I think people might be hearing this, be like, oh, that sounds exhausting. Ladies and gentlemen, you're already doing this. You just might be doing it blindly or unintentionally, but you have standards already. I'm just saying sharpen and choose them. You already decide what to eat, but the difference is you may be making your eating decisions based on what tastes good. I'm making my eating decisions based on what does good things for my body, and I get it to taste as good as I possibly can on that. The purpose of me eating food is not for me to enjoy flavor every time. The purpose of me eating food is for that food to do something good for my body and for it to taste as good as possible. And that's 80% of my food. The other 20% of my food, my standard at least, is eat whatever I want. I do not care. So if I'm really, really disciplined in 80% of exactly the standards I've set for myself, the other 20%, I don't have to worry about, and I can eat anything because the other 80% is good. Effort is how hard will I work to adhere to my standards, my choices, and my objectives. And the last one is skill. My job is to be really good and keep getting better and to adjust and change as I move through life to be good at the disciplines required at this season of my life, at this stage of my career, at this section of parenting. I can't parent my 6-year-old son the way I parented him when he was 2. I can't interact with my wife the same way now with 2 young children in our house, the way I did when we were between our engagement and our wedding. We're different people. She has different emotions. I have different emotions. We have different responsibilities, different energy levels. My disciplines need to be different at this stage of our life than they were, say, 8 or 9 years ago. So I have to adjust. So that's the 5 things that I look at: choice, purpose or objective, standard, effort, and skill. Those 5 things are what compose a person's discipline.
So I just want to add that as you're going through these and as I'm listening to this may be obvious to many, but each of these 5 are within your control, within our control.
That's exactly the point. That's the discipline within.
And I think that's an important point, and it's a very powerful one, because there are certainly many things that are outside our control, but you, coming from a sports background, have certainly heard control the controllables. This is a big one. This is definitely a big one.
Yeah. And even the phrase control the controllables, I chafe against that phrase a little bit, because the phrase, for the same reason I chafe against, not because the phrase has bad intent, it has great intent, but I also chafe against the phrase work-life balance. And I chafe against them for the same reasons, is they both insinuate, in my observation, not saying I'm right, just a perspective for people to think about, they both insinuate unintentional things. Control the controllables insinuates there is some long list and world of controllable things, when the reality is there's only one controllable thing in the entire world. Just one. And that is yourself. That's it. The only thing, people that control the controllables, everybody starts looking around. Nope. Control the controllable, which is what? You and everything about you. Number 1. Number 2, work-life balance. I don't like that phrase because the phrase insinuates that somehow your work is not your life. There's a balance between work and then your life. When the reality is there's no balance between work and life. Your work is the largest chunk of your life. So if you're trying to get away from work to get back to your life, you are spending the majority of your breathing hours not living. No. I work more than I do anything else in the world, including spending time with my beautiful children and my amazing wife. So if that's not my life, what the hell am I doing?
It's a good point.
The biggest part of my life. Now, it may not be the most emotional part or the most meaningful part, but it is the biggest portion of my life. So it gets my purpose. It gets the best of me. And so does my family. But my family probably gets a smaller chunk of time than my work, just given the nature of how things work. And we're not in a society where we work as a family together anymore. We just don't do that, right? That was 500 years ago. I'd be with my kids all day, every day, and we'd all be working together.
Sure.
We don't have that. Now we go away from our families to work. So don't think that somehow when you're working, that's not your life. Like I think that's a broken mindset.
Well, speaking to that point, then share with us some of the things that you do to create boundaries, if that would be the right word that you would use,
Sure.
around your work and family. So, do
Mm.
you have a certain time that you end work for the day? Do you work on the
Mm.
weekends? What are some of those things that you do to ensure that family time matters, that you're pouring into your family, those sorts of things, and still giving everything that you've got, your disciplined lifestyle, to the work side as well?
Yeah, I'm not a routine person. And so here's a great example of like the difference between disciplines and standards and stuff. And so, this is like this has historically been sort of a place of tension between me and my wife, in that my wife I grew up with an entrepreneurial dad. We worked together for 15 years, and my mom is a flight attendant, and my dad was a consultant for, still is. And so it was very normal for me, for my parents to be in and out of the house, flying and traveling all around. My wife's family, far more Midwest traditional. Dad was gone out of the house before any of the kids woke up. He was done at his job at like 3:30, and he didn't own a business, and he had a business where he could, where when he left the business, like he didn't do anything else. So he didn't have anything to do with the business when he was back home. And so he just poured himself into it, and then would just wake up the next morning and go back to work. Amazing. I'm different. I own a business. I don't have time off. I don't have that checkout window. And so a point of tension between me and my wife is, when do I shut that off and go just be dad? And, from her observation, it's like, hey, you never shut it off. And it doesn't mean that I'm not present, but, it might be like 6:30 and I'm still in my office, you know, reading or studying, or, last night, 6:30 to 8, I was doing a webinar with 30 doctors, and my, 3-year-old daughter's coming in, and my wife's upstairs putting the kids to bed. Like, it's non-traditional like that. But I also own a business. Now, at the same time, on a Wednesday, we go spend the entire day together. Her dad could never do that with her. Her dad could, I could go, like, I could take any day I really want off if I want to, and go do some stuff. I have a ton of flexibility, but the exchange is, those boundaries are a little less clear, right? And then I'm not a routine person, and I'm not like a process person. I like structure, but enough to keep me in the rails, but not too much. And so, um, I don't have I don't have what I would call specific and exact procedures and elements like that. What I know is that if I'm going to make a decision, be definitive about it. And look, I, like everybody else, set standards, and I experience all the same challenges and difficulties and temptations for everybody else. And so I'm hanging out with my kids, I'm doing whatever, and my phone pings, and I'm putting my son to bed, and I sit and I have to make the choice. Do I look at my phone? Do I not? Do I keep my phone out of the room? And should I look at this? And while he's in brushing his teeth and it's taking 15 minutes longer than it needs to take, am I going to, open it up and do some things? And, or am I going to sit there and just give him my full attention? I wrestle with the same stuff everybody else does. I'm not a robot. I'm a human being. I'm super emotion driven, but my job is to put the right kinds of structures and disciplines that allow me to steer it that way. But I also recognize that, I need grace from myself. I need grace from my wife. I need grace from my kids. Same thing back and forth. So I will share one thing that I learned from my dad, because he was incredible with this. And he told me about it as I was a kid, and when I was old enough to understand it. And I watched him do it once I became an adult, and I do it with my kids because I learned it from my dad. And that is that what my dad was incredibly intentional at doing was, between when his workday ended and he had some kind of travel, car, plane, whatever it was. It's harder when it's in the house because the moment is so fast. But if you have travel between where your work ends and when you kind of come through your front door, so to speak, or meet your family for dinner, whatever you're doing, what my dad did was he used that time to re-energize himself, to bring dad energy, husband energy to his family, me, my brother, his wife, Brenda, my stepmom. And if he had 15 minutes, all 15 of those minutes were cultivated in crafting, creating, revving up, whatever he was doing, like music, phones, silent, whatever. I don't know what he did, frankly. I don't even know. I know what I do. But he would show up and he would just like, it was as if he was like a bottomless pit of like, I'm ready to give, whatever it was, like in his style, right? And so I do the same thing. I have about a half-hour drive from my office back to my house. And man, when I get through that door, what I know is this: what my kids feel for me in those first 2 minutes from dad, that's the stuff they remember. That's the stuff that tells them like, what kind of night is this going to be? And if I come in and I'm like, the drive and the traffic and the work, they don't care. All they know is, dad's not in a great place. And my 3-year-old daughter can feel that from me. But man, if I walk through the door, and here's what I do, my daughter does this, and she loves this. I come through the door, and like the way our house works, where I come through the door, they can't see me, usually. And so when I come through the door, like they may or may not hear something, and I will, my son learned how to whistle a couple of years ago. So now he's like a really good loud whistler. So I'll come through the door. My daughter can't whistle, but I'll just whistle something. I'll just be like, and then when they hear that whistle, they know dad's home. Right. But they also know, it's kind of Pavlovian, right? They know dad's home, and I'll hear them like yelp and squeal and all whatever from whatever corner of the house. And my daughter now knows that when I come around that corner and she finds me wherever she is, the first thing I'm going to say to her is, you're not strong enough to knock me down. And she will say, yes, I am. And I'll go, no, you're not. And she will run at me as hard as she can. And she will give me the biggest hug, and she will knock me down and she'll blast me to the ground. I'm like, oh my gosh, you are strong enough, whatever. And she cackles, and it may not be every single time because they might be busy or got a new toy, or, she's got a face full of cookies, whatever is going on. But like most days, this is what happens. And in that 2-minute window, I am really, really, really specific. I want them to feel like they're the only people in the world. I want them to feel like there is nothing taking my attention away other than who they are and what's going on. And like, they're consumed in that. And in also a way, like my wife needs a little bit of space. So hopefully I can like take them away so that my wife can be like, get away from me for a little bit. We love you, but get away. Then after that, there's a tone setter for the rest of the night, right? There's a tone setter for, okay, we got dad. He's here. And like his energy is now part of our house. And it hasn't been here. Now it's here. Let's go. And look, we're like every family. Like that's, our kids are, our daughter had an awful day yesterday. Just like she woke up, she was just in a horrible mood, and just she's 3. So she's in that spot, right? So yesterday was just a bad day for Ava Kight. Okay. Just not a great afternoon. Right. So we're like everybody. But nonetheless, when I got home, that happened and she did it and good. And then she just went right back to being pissed off. Like, we're normal, okay? But nonetheless, my hope is that the net of that over the course of their lives and our lives together is one that shapes her and us and our relationship in a way where her wiring is affected. And she knows that, hey, bad days aren't forever. They're just bad days. We can choose our energy. We can put our energy. You can be physically exhausted, and you can emotionally get to a great place of energy, even if you're physically exhausted at the end of a workday. And I think that is a parent's and a family's responsibility.
I would agree with you. And I can speak from experience that repetition, that putting yourself in a place of bringing the energy, being intentional about it, setting that attention before you walk in a door, before you enter a building, into your house, doing that over and over again, it makes a significant difference. It's building habits. And it reminded me, as you were telling that story about my own father, the way that he used to come in the house when I was a little kid, he was a real estate agent. And when he would return from work at the end of the day, the way he would enter the room, it just that the energy level changed. The lights went brighter. And it was just his voice that made such a significant difference. And interestingly enough, this is actually something that I use as a tool in my coaching business with clients that I work with, is before walking into a meeting, before walking in to give a speech, before walking into a conversation, to pause right at the doorway and visualize, bring the feeling of who you want to be in that moment. How do you want to show up for this meeting? How do you want to show up for that coworker? Put yourself in that place, take a deep breath, visualize it, and get your energy to a point where you are going to show up as that person that you intentionally plan to be. And it makes a difference, right? You're giving energy as opposed to sucking energy. So thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to, this is such an important aspect of what you do today, but one of the things that I mentioned at the top of the episode was about the way that we respond to life's events affect the outcomes. And if you could share the formula that you have, E plus R equals O, walk us through that so our audience understands why this matters and how important this is.
Yeah. So E plus R equals O is it's just the basic building blocks of life. Pick your analogy. It is it's the atoms that make up, or the quarks, whatever the lowest unit we've discovered recently is. I can't quite keep up with how far we've gone down into matter yet, but E plus R equals O in our living world, as opposed to the physics world. In the human world, E plus R equals O is the basic fundamental building block of life, in the same way that atoms or quarks are the building block of matter. And E plus R equals O is event plus response equals outcome. And whether you view it, say, like building blocks of matter, or I'll often think of it and feel it and visualize it like, you ever seen The Matrix? You remember the green code going through the matrix, right? And once you see the green code, all of a sudden you're like, oh, everything is made of this. And you can now all of a sudden you can affect the world very differently when you see the code it works by. I view it that way. I also, and this is important, I also view that E plus R equals O is the code that the world works by, just like in the Matrix, whether or not you realize it or believe it, right? So event plus response equals outcome. Here's why I say that, Jay. Just because you don't pay attention to event plus response equals outcome, do events still happen?
Of course.
Do you still respond to them?
Absolutely.
Do your responses create outcomes?
Yes, they do. So
whether you pay attention to it or not, by the way, if you change the language and call it situation, action, result, does that change the fabric of it?
No.
It's the same thing. So I don't care about the letters. I don't care about the, whatever, I don't care about the terms. I don't care about awareness. It is going on. Now, some people may not enjoy that. They may not like that because it kind of ruins the narrative of, oh, my life is simply a reflection of the events that have happened to me. And they want to resist E plus R equals O because it creates discomfort. I don't ever want to build my life on ignoring reality, including realities that I don't like, right? My dad was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer in 2020. It's much more convenient for me to ignore that reality and act like it's not real. And plenty of people do when encountered with those kinds of things. But that comes at the cost. So E plus R equals O to me is this fabric that exists, whether I am aware of it or not. And my job, even in the discomfort of it, is to make sure that I am really, really good at it. And so there's a mindset, a skill, and a speed aspect to this. The mindset is understanding that I don't control events, I don't control outcomes, but I do control my response. People will struggle with that because they like to think they can control outcomes. But the easiest way to know that we don't control outcomes is if you controlled outcomes, what would your business look like right now? What would your bank account look like right now? What would all of your relationships look like right now? Why is your life in any level of disarray, discomfort, or inconvenience? If you controlled outcomes, what are you waiting for? If you controlled outcomes, go down to the pediatric cancer ward. Control the outcome. If you controlled outcomes, feedback should be easier to give, right? Like We don't. We earn outcomes with really good responses. So that's the mindset. The skill is this in this sequence. 90% of moments in life are this sequence. What outcome do I want? What event do I have? And therefore, what response do I need? 10% of life, you start with the event. But we don't want to start with the event because the event, we don't want the event to be the limiting or constraining factor. The kid that grows up I grew up in LA and San Diego, and I grew up not far from Crenshaw and South Central. I was in Hermosa Beach, Manhattan Beach. It's like, nothing like that, but it's a 15-minute drive. The kid that grows up in South Central, if they start with the event, they say, well, what could I possibly do with my life growing up in South Central? And they're immediately limited by the question. Whereas if we start with the outcome and you say, what do you want to become in life? And they can say anything. Then we say, well, how do we get there from South Central? It's a very different way of asking the question. Right? Too many people say, even like different topics, and I know it's sensitive to say, but like even topics say like around genders and work and stuff. And I work in private equity. My day job is I build leaders, culture, and behavior for our portfolio companies in a private equity firm here in Denver. And there's not a lot of women in private equity. And so starting from the question of, well, how high could I climb as a leader in private equity as a woman? I'm like, well, no, that's not the question. You're starting with as if there's some kind of physical constraint on you when there isn't. There's no constraint on you if you're in South Central. It's just the circumstance. It's the playing field. The kid in Beverly Hills has constraints, right? They grew up in privilege, and they lose the gift of being tough, of having to figure out how to make something happen without the resources, of ingenuity that the kid in South Central was gifted with. But the kid in Beverly Hills, they have the benefit of tons of resources and freedom, but they also deal with yes men and parents who probably make things a lot easier for them. So they learn lessons a lot later in life. The kid in South Central has to deal with, stuff that I hope none of us ever have to, like shootings and somebody dying and, a parent going to jail or whatever happens to be, just the context. But the point is that both of them are working from a set of events. If we use the event to define their life, we remove autonomy and freedom and control. So the skill of E plus R equals O is 90% of life is what outcome do I want? Outcome first, event second. And then viewing the event that we have as the playing field to go earn the outcomes that we're going after. So the mindset, the skill, and then the third component is the speed. And that is, how fast can you do that? How quickly can you perceive what's going on, process E plus R equals O, access a disciplined, skillful response, and engage in it? If it takes me 15 minutes to get prepared in my house to respond well to my kids, my kids might have lost interest in me. I've got a 10-second window. Right? If we're negotiating and you negotiate with me and I'm like, well, I can't figure out how to respond to you in a negotiation and I got to get back to you tomorrow, I'm going to be less effective. If I figure out what I wish I would have said to my wife when we were having a disagreement the next day, or I speak way too fast, the wrong thing, right? So it's not just about being good at E plus R equals O. It's about being able to do E plus R equals O at the speed of life and the speed that this particular moment requires. So the mindset, the skill, and then being able to do it at speed of real life, real business, real relationships.
Well, this is so good, and I'm sure that many who are watching and listening right now have more than likely heard something maybe similar but said differently, inserting different words. But here's the thing. We can hear lots of things. We can read great information. Applying it is where the difference is made. So for all of you, I would ask you to listen to this episode again. Go back to your notes, apply what you're learning here, apply the lessons that Brian has been sharing. And E plus R equals O, it's start with the end in mind, right? We're starting with the end in mind, and then we're deconstructing, we're working backwards. And it's such a powerful formula to remember. And obviously apply. So I thank you for sharing that. So as we wrap up our conversation, I have all of your social handles, links to all the great things that you're doing, which we'll put in the show notes. I would love it if you would give our audience a challenge. What is something that you would challenge them to do now?
A challenge I would give is write down the behavior standards that you will live by. And don't just write down what you are going to do, write down what you are not going to do. Jay, I think success starts with what we decide not to do. I'm a big believer in the power of don't. A lot of lives get derailed because somebody did something that had they just avoided it, they would have kept all their options on the table. But they made the one big mistake, not fatal, but directionally changed the trajectory of their life. Like, give you an example, like if you get addicted to something, the trajectory of your life changes forever. It doesn't make you a bad person, but your life changes. So just don't. Deciding what I'm not going to do, it's a big deal. So I don't complain. I don't blame. I don't get defensive. I don't watch the news. Period. It's not negotiable for me. I don't. And here's what's cool about it. I don't need a plan for what to do instead. Anything that fills my life that isn't those things, better than those. And then I can start building the do. So my challenge is, rather than write down core values, write down your core behaviors and write down your core don't behaviors, so that you have a clear reference point. Am I the person that I say that I am? It's easy to call whatever my behavior is respect. It's a lot more challenging when you write down, this is what respect has to look like. I'll give you one example of this. Let's take it from empathy. A lot of people believe they're empathetic people, but then they treat people who disagree with them around a social issue or a political issue awfully. That means you are not an empathetic individual. If you only empathize with people who agree with you socially and politically on issues, you are not empathetic. You're not. I love you. You are not empathetic. You're political. If you're empathetic, then you empathize with people who don't agree with you. Smart people who just have different views or different perspectives or different beliefs or whatever it happens to be. That's what empathy looks like. So until you put it down in do and don't behaviors, it's an idea that we'll kind of tweak and manipulate around to paint ourselves in the best possible light. The challenge is, don't leave your values up to ideas. Put them into concrete do and don't behaviors. And then, man, just audit yourself over the course of 3 months. You need a long time to do it. So you need 3 months. Don't do a week. Can't learn much about yourself in a week. But over 3 months, you are going to see a very clear pattern of, I say that I do this, but I am, right? I'm doing that. Dang it. I'm doing the opposite of what I said. So like, that's the important part. And the only reason you wouldn't do it is you're afraid of what you would look at. So don't be afraid of it. Be honest with it. Be real. Do and don't, and then discipline your life to be exactly who you want to become. And don't worry if it looks like anybody else. Make it look like you.
Yeah, that is so good. What a great challenge. And it reminded me of something you said earlier when you were talking about what discipline means, how it comes from within. And you mentioned, am I going to be selective or is this going to be universal? And obviously you made the choice to be universal. So when you talk about empathy and being empathetic, are we being selectively empathetic or are we universally empathetic? So what a great challenge. I want to thank you so very much for sharing that with us. And also thank you for bringing your true authentic self today, for sharing of your wisdom, for bringing it all today. I thank you so very much. I'm grateful for you. I certainly have learned a lot, and I know our audience has as well. I appreciate you.
Yeah. You're welcome. It's a fun conversation. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And for all of you, thank you so much for watching and listening. And I do have a favor to ask. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That goes a long way in helping this podcast continue to grow and reach an even larger audience. And to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button. And until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure you subscribe to Daily Discipline, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.